Okay, I'm back here. I hope what I had shared with you in the previous tape, that you got some kind of an understanding of how group work can be used as a mode of intervention. Now, I left you at that time by saying that as a school social worker, how you would use groups in working the two sets of youngsters. One was the children who had learning difficulties, and the second one was the children who had some behavioral difficulties and who were seen as disruptive and whatnot. Now let me ask you whether you had some thoughts of how you would have focused on your role as a social worker in these two different groups. Now, let me elaborate and point by point. In the first one, I think that the children who have got learning difficulties, when they are pulled out of the class to attend their specific other classes, whether it's speech therapy, group therapy, occupational therapy or whatnot type of thing, they are already castigated as in a special individual, their special needs, and children could be many times very unintentionally very cruel and teasing and whatnot. So these kids could be branded in one way. So I think in group work, when you bring these kids, it could be more as a safe place for them to express what they need, because they are not able to comprehend and understand the teacher at a same level as the general classes, or they have got difficulty in speech. But in this kind of a formed group setting, the worker, you can establish a sort of a compassionate environment, an accepting environment, an environment of peers where there is much degree of tolerance and acceptance. And that will be your role there, because not that the teacher is not tolerant or accepting of these youngsters. The special education teachers do a fantastic job. But many times, because of budgetary constrictions, many of the school districts do not have those kinds of special classes available. So many times they are linked and lumped together, all these students. But if you have this kind of an opportunity for you to do that, then you can give the group members a little bit more safer opportunity, safer environment. Similarly, now let's talk about the behavioral kids. That is a rather challenging for the worker as much as for the kids within the group. Now, what are the challenges for the worker? And if you take one child who is disruptive behaviorally, then what would you do if you have got 6 of them? You multiply the behavioral disruption by 6 times, and that means you are going to start ready to pull your hair. Well, what can you do? How will you stop some of these kinds of things? When you get behaviorally disruptive children are referred to you as a social worker of the school, then you might have to use some program. Like sometimes you can say, let's go to the gym, and 3 and 3, let's have 2 teams and throw basketball. Now, within that thing, so when you begin that bringing out the competitiveness, that competitiveness oftentimes can stop the behaviorally disruptive mode of activity among these youngsters, and they can concentrate onto their things. So this is what we call as programming. Now, programming is a mode which is effectively used to achieve the goals of the group. Now, you cannot, even in a formed group, you have a purpose why you have formed this group. you have got to have some goals. And you have got to have those goals on an individual members. These are the things I've got it for Johnny. This is what I've got it for Bobby. This is what I've got it for Sam. But then you have got to also have a total program goals for the total group. This is a group of youngsters between 10 and 11-year-old latency age kids, 4th to 5th or 6th grade. Now don't form groups very disparate. Don't put the same group 15-year-old and 10-year-old. Now that is one of the things which we have got it in group work where we call it composition. The composition principle is that it should not be too much disparate. If you are going to have a boys and girls mixed group, for instance, boys are later in growing up biologically. Girls are much faster. And their biological growth as well as their emotional growth is much faster than the boys. I'll give you an example. Long time ago, when I was working for a court setting, because they wanted me to use my group work skills in a family and juvenile court system, they wanted to have the boys and girls who had behavioral problems and they were repeatedly being picked up by the law and authority. So I said, sure. And I formed a group of 15 to 16-year-old boys and girls. Now mind you, I got 4 boys who were 15 and 1 boy who was 16. But on the other hand, and for the girls' side, I got 3 girls who were 16 and 2 girls who were almost going 17. And I'm telling you, that was the biggest disaster, because the 16-year-old and 17-year-old girls had a different thing in agenda. Their growth was at emotional and biological growth pattern was at a different level. They were talking about issues such as going out, dating, makeup, partying, and sometimes even very overtly talking about usage of alcohol and other things. This is what they got into trouble. The boys, on the other hand, the 15-year-old boy, he was talking about going skating. He was talking about getting into antisocial behavior such as going around and breaking car antennas, and those kinds of things. So you can see the psychosocial development of these youngsters were at 2 different levels. If you had 15-year-old girls versus a 17-year-old boys, that would have been okay. But then again, at that level, you had to be very careful of making mixed gender groups, because a lot of times this is a period where biologically these are growing children, the hormones are very active, and we do not want to give them more ammunitions that more than what they have it. So these are some of the things I briefly touched upon, some programming, how it can be used. I'm giving you some principles on how compositions can be done, and one more principle before I end today's session is that number size is a very important one, and that comes again and again question, and so I'll leave you with some thoughts on that one. But one of the things is, in group work, the size many times is dependent upon the process. That is, what is the activity do you want to happen? What is the dynamics are you expecting? So that is where the size is correlates. For instance, if it is a sort of a task-oriented, specific goal-oriented group, that this is what we will do it, the size doesn't matter that much. You can even have 8, 10, 12 people. Now, if you have got size is related to age, latency age kids who are like 10 to 11 years old, they prefer to have a smaller group. They will not be able to have a large group like 14, 12, 13 type of things. So I would usually compose groups of young latency age kids between 6 and 7. Size is also related to what I call it as initial mortality. You know, it's a rather loaded term I'm using, initial mortality. When you compose a group, always compose about 20% higher. If you want to start a group, always have 20% higher. If you want to go have a group of 7 members, try to have 9 members, minimum. Because I can guarantee that within the first phase of the group, you'll have at least 1, 2, sometimes even 3 members dropping off. Now imagine you want to have an ideal number for a group of 7. And then supposing 3 people drop off, so you end up with 4. Now that is too small for the group. So the size has got that kind of a thing. Many times you also find that if individual members, like our group which we are talking about, emotionally and intellectually challenged children, that group cannot be very big, because within the group context you also require a lot of individual attention. So we have talked about today a little bit about size, we talked about composition, and we have talked about certain things with regarding to goals and activities and programming. Until next time, bye-bye.